You ever have one of those moments where the room goes quiet, not because anyone told it to, but because the truth just walked in and smacked everyone across the face? That was my 18th birthday. It was supposed to be a celebration. You know, the kind where family comes together, there's cake, awkward hugs, maybe a cringy slideshow of baby photos. Instead, it turned into a public unveiling of years of favoritism, like ripping off a Band-Aid only to find a festering wound underneath. Let me back up a bit. My name's Ellis. I'm 18 now. My older brother, Reed, is 21 and has always been the golden child. Firstborn, charming, quarterback in high school, loved by every aunt and uncle. Me? I was the quiet one. The hill grow out of it kid. When Reed turned 18, my parents threw a massive backyard party, rented speakers, a DJ, even bought him a used Mustang as a surprise. I remember that day because I was the one running around helping Mom set up balloons, even though no one had asked, even though no one said thanks. Fast forward 3 years. For my birthday, a store-bought sheet cake, no DJ, no decorations, a card from my parents with a $20 bill inside and some half-hearted, "Congrats, kiddo." It stung, but I smiled. Pretended I didn't notice. Pretended I hadn't overheard my dad tell someone on the phone that Ellis doesn't need all that flashy stuff. He's more low-key. Right. Because being forgotten is just my vibe now? But then my Aunt Tasha showed up. Aunt Tasha is that one relative who sees through the bullshit. She looked around, then looked at me. And I swear, her jaw locked in a way that said, "Not today." She waited until dessert, then stood up. And with her wine glass in one hand and her "I've had it" voice loaded, she turned to my parents and said, loud enough for the room to hush, "Why does it feel like Ellis got a pity party while Reed got a coronation?" You could have heard a fork drop. My mom tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, it's not like that." But Aunt Natasha wasn't having it. No DJ, no photos, no real effort. And don't think I didn't notice that Reed got a car and Ellis got a card. Did you think no one would remember? My dad muttered something about tight finances and Reed needed it more, but the damage was done. People shifted in their seats. One of my cousins whispered, "Damn." That was the first time in years I saw my parents uncomfortable. It was oddly satisfying. I excused myself quietly, walked to my room, and sat on the edge of my bed for a while. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I just felt empty. Like I'd finally seen my place in the family hierarchy in high definition. Later that evening, my grandparents picked me up and took me out to dinner. Just us three. They didn't say much at first, but when the food arrived, Grandma reached over and said, "You deserve better. And I'm sorry you had to find out this way. That was the first time I cried that night." When I got back home, my parents were waiting, arms crossed. Dad's expression was a mix of anger and embarrassment. "You humiliated us in front of the whole family," Mom said flatly. "I didn't say anything," I replied. "Exactly," she snapped. And that's when I realized they weren't mad because I made a scene. They were mad because they got caught. The next few weeks were pure silence. No eye contact, no breakfast table chatter, just walls where people used to be. Then, out of nowhere, a white 1998 Subaru Legacy showed up in the driveway. No bow, no ceremony. Just the keys and the title stuffed in a manila envelope and tossed on the kitchen counter. "Have fun?" Dad said without even looking at me. I should have felt happy. I really should have. I even said thank you, though I got nothing in return but a stiff nod. But something felt off, like the car was an apology wrapped in resentment. And I was right to feel that way. 3 weeks later, the Subaru's engine blew on the highway. I wasn't even speeding 45 mph, cruising along, and the temp gauge suddenly spiked. Steam poured from the hood like the car was exhaling all its secrets at once. The mechanic's verdict? Blown head gasket. Terminal. My grandparents helped tow it home, and my grandpa, who knows his way around a wrench, checked the engine. What he found was gasket sealer dumped in the coolant, an old trick to make a dying engine pretend it's still breathing. The car had been patched up to look good just long enough to sell. My parents? Shrugged. "Well, that's karma," Dad said. "Karma? For what, being the second child?" Grandma was standing right there when he said it. Her eyes went cold. She told me to wait in my room while she and Grandpa had a word with them. 2 hours later, I was called back down. The energy in the living room? Shattered. My parents were slouched on the couch like deflated balloons. My uncle and 2 other relatives had shown up too. Apparently, my grandparents had told them everything. Turns out, my parents hadn't even test-driven the Subaru, just bought the cheapest thing they could find online that still looked decent. Didn't check the engine. Didn't even read the full ad. My uncle, who's a car guy, pulled me aside and said, "That engine's toast, Ellis. Not even worth fixing." So now I was carless. Again, I called my job and told them I couldn't come in. They understood, but put me on unpaid leave. That night, I sat on the floor of my room and stared at the wall. I didn't even know what to feel anymore. But then something happened. 3 days later, my grandparents came back with a 1999 Honda Civic. Clean, solid, and actually inspected. My uncle gave it a thumbs up after checking every bolt. It even came with a list of recent repairs and maintenance records. They handed me the keys. My mom barely looked up from her phone. Dad muttered, "It's done." And just like that, I had a new car. One that wouldn't explode on the highway. One that was given out of care, not guilt. I looked at my parents, and I swear, they didn't look defeated. They looked exposed. Like they finally realized everyone saw them for who they were. After the Civic arrived, something shifted in the house. It wasn't loud or obvious, but the silence felt heavier. I could tell my parents weren't thrilled about how things had played out. Maybe it was the family finding out, or the fact that they didn't get to control the narrative anymore. Either way, they stopped pretending. My dad barely said 2 words to me, and my mom floated around like I wasn't there at all. No more fake smiles. Just awkward eye contact and the occasional passive-aggressive sigh when I walked into the kitchen. And I stopped trying. I didn't push for conversation or force small talk. We all moved like roommates who couldn't wait for the lease to end. But the weird part, I didn't feel sad, just free. Like I'd finally stopped begging for warmth from a fireplace that had gone cold years ago. The Civic ran great, by the way. Smooth engine, clean interior, decent gas mileage. Nothing flashy but solid. Reliable. That little car felt like the first real thing someone had done for me because they cared, not because they felt obligated or exposed. It came from my grandparents, sure, but it was more than just a ride. It was proof that someone out there still saw me, still thought I mattered. Meanwhile, my parents drifted further into their corner of denial. I'd catch them whispering sometimes, like I wasn't still part of the household. If I entered the room mid-conversation, they'd go quiet or switch the topic to something bland like grocery lists or weather. You know, classic nothing to see here energy. It didn't bother me. Not really. At that point, I'd stopped trying to get picked for a team I was never really on. Then college acceptance letters started coming in. I had applied to a handful of schools, nothing Ivy League or pretentious, just solid, affordable places where I could build a future without drowning in debt. One afternoon, I opened the envelope from Western Ridge University. I'd gotten in. Not only that, I landed a 50% academic scholarship. My chest tightened reading the letter. I wasn't just accepted. I was wanted. I sat with the news for a moment before telling anyone. And when I did, their reaction was underwhelming. I walked into the living room with the letter in my hand, my voice light but hopeful. "Hey, I got into Western Ridge. And they're giving me a scholarship." My mom looked up from her phone. "That's good," she said flatly. My dad didn't even look up, just kept scrolling on his tablet. Not a smile, not a congrats. It was like I'd told them dinner was ready, not that their youngest son had just earned half his tuition through sheer effort. I stood there for another awkward second, then turned and left. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the letter on the ground in some dramatic fit. I just went to my room and texted my grandparents. They were thrilled. I could hear Grandma's joy through the speaker when she called. "That's amazing, sweetheart. You earned every bit of that." And she meant it, unlike the people I lived with. I guess that's when she decided it was time to stop pretending too. A few days later, she came over, sat both my parents down, and asked the question I hadn't had the courage to ask. "Why do you act like Ellis is a stranger in your own home?" The room fell still. Dad looked at the floor. Mom crossed her arms. "We don't," she said weakly, but even she didn't believe it. Grandma didn't flinch. "You do. He works hard. He's never caused you trouble. He gets into a great school with a scholarship, and you act like he told you he's moving to Mars. What's the problem?" Dad still wouldn't look up. And Mom finally muttered something that made my stomach drop. We were hoping we'd have a girl the second time. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I didn't even say anything. I just sat there still, like if I didn't move, the moment might pass. But it didn't. Grandma pressed them. She already knew, of course. She'd hinted at things before, how my parents didn't want to know the gender before I was born, how they'd bought pink clothes and painted the nursery peach. You were an unplanned boy, she said softly later when we were alone in the kitchen. They already had Reed, and they thought maybe this time they'd get their girl. But when you came out another boy, I think it broke something in them. It's not fair to you, Ellis. It never was. Suddenly, so much made sense. Why I wore Reed's old clothes until I was 4. Why my birthdays were afterthoughts. Why I'd always felt like I was apologizing for existing. They hadn't just favored Reed, they resented me for not being someone I was never going to be. For being born wrong in their eyes. It was surreal. Not because I didn't already feel that rejection deep down, but because now it had a name, a cause, a reason. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. I was just never what they wanted. I'd spent years twisting myself into knots trying to figure out how to earn their love, not realizing it was never about me, it was about the daughter they never had. After that conversation, something in me stopped hoping. Not in a sad, tragic way. In a freeing way. I started to see my future as something I could shape without their input. I talked to Western Ridge directly and made sure all my documents were in order. I gave the admissions office a heads up that if anyone else ever tried to withdraw me or change anything on my behalf, they needed to contact me directly. I don't think my parents would go that far, but paranoia makes you careful. And honestly, I trust caution more than I trust them. Out of nowhere, Reed called. We hadn't talked much in the past couple years, not since he went to college out of state. But apparently, Grandma had told him everything. I'm sorry, he said, voice lower than usual. I didn't know it was like that for you. He admitted that he'd always noticed some difference in how we were treated, but hadn't realized how deep it went. Then he told me something unexpected, that he wasn't coming back home after graduation. I like it here, he said. I've got a life here. I think you should do the same. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Not emotional, just real. And maybe that was enough. That weekend, my grandparents threw me a surprise party. Real cake. DJ. Food that didn't come from the clearance section. It felt like they were giving me the birthday I'd missed. Not just this year, but for the last 18. My parents came, technically. They sat in the back, stiff as mannequins, nursing light beers and saying little. They were watching a version of my life that didn't need them anymore, and I think that terrified them more than any confrontation ever could. They couldn't play the doting parents here. The family had already made their disappointment in them loud and clear. I didn't rub it in. I didn't have to. The room did it for me. And when Grandma stood up, raised a glass, and said, Ellis is going to make something amazing of himself, with or without people who should have supported him, I saw Mom flinch, just a little, enough. That moment wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was the truth, finally said out loud, in front of everyone. And I didn't need to say a word. The days leading up to college felt like walking a tightrope, except no one was watching to see if I'd fall. My parents didn't ask what I needed or how I was getting there. No, how's the packing going, or do you have your class schedule? It was like I was moving out for a weekend, not the next chapter of my life. But that silence, it told me everything I needed to know. I handled it all myself. Bought storage bins, organized my dorm essentials, figured out the move-in checklist. My grandparents offered to help, of course, and I took them up on it. Grandpa's truck became my moving van, and Grandma packed snacks and toiletries like I was being deployed. Not starting freshman year, but I loved it. Their care was quiet, thoughtful, consistent, the kind of support that didn't need to be earned or begged for. Meanwhile, my parents kept their distance. I think they were hoping if they didn't say goodbye, it wouldn't feel like I was really leaving. Or maybe it was their way of clinging to control, as if silence could rewrite history. But it couldn't. The night before I was supposed to leave, I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink. My mom was sitting at the table alone, scrolling on her phone with that distant look she always wore when something was bothering her, but she refused to say it out loud. She looked up briefly, her eyes meeting mine, then dropped them again. Everything packed? she asked without much weight behind the question. Yeah, I said. Early start tomorrow, she nodded. A pause. Then, make sure you call your father before you go. The wording caught me, not us. Not call home, just him. Like she was already stepping out of this emotionally, preparing her exit from the scene. I didn't answer. Just nodded once and left the room. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was anxious about school, but because I kept thinking back to all the years I spent in that house feeling invisible. The way they smiled wider for Reed. The way they only clapped at the milestones that mattered to them. The way birthdays for me felt like obligations instead of celebrations. And now that I was leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't losing a son, they were just watching a mistake walk away on his own 2 feet. The next morning, I showered, dressed, grabbed my last bag, and headed downstairs. The house was still. Dad was at the kitchen counter nursing a cup of coffee. Mom sat across from him. Neither of them stood up. Neither of them offered to ride with me, not even to say goodbye at the curb. Drive safe, Dad said without looking up from his mug. Text when you get there. I didn't ask for more. I didn't hope for more. I just turned the key and walked out. My grandparents were waiting in the driveway with the truck running. Grandma squeezed my hand when she saw my face. You okay? She asked softly. Yeah, I lied. Just ready. We loaded up in quiet teamwork, like we'd done this before. And maybe in some way, we had. Not this exact move, but all the little escapes before the weekend visits, the surprise getaways, the subtle moments they shielded me when my parents' indifference became too loud to ignore. We hit the road and talked about everything but my parents. Classes, dorm life, orientation, part-time jobs. It was comforting. They knew I didn't want to rehash old wounds. We got to campus by early afternoon. I checked in, picked up my keys, and we started unloading. My dorm was small but clean. 2 beds, 2 desks, beige walls begging for posters. My roommate hadn't arrived yet, so I had the space to myself for a moment. As I looked around, I realized for the first time in a long time, I felt light. No eggshells, no quiet judgment. Just a space that was mine. After everything was unpacked, my grandparents didn't linger. They knew not to make this goodbye heavy. Grandma hugged me tight and said, "We're proud of you, no matter what." Grandpa gave me a long look and said, "Don't let anyone dim your light, Ellis. You shine now." And just like that, they were gone. I stood there by the window watching their truck pull away, and for a second, I felt something catch in my throat. Not sadness, not fear, just release. I was free. I had no illusions about this being easy. College wasn't going to fix everything. But it was a start, a real one. I took a deep breath, sat on my bed, and opened my laptop to check my emails. That's when I saw an unread message from Western Ridge Admissions. Subject line, urgent enrollment confirmation issue. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open. The message was short, stating that someone had called claiming to be me and said I was withdrawing from the university. The school flagged the call because the voice didn't match my records and the details were vague. I felt a cold chill crawl down my spine. I immediately picked up the phone and called the admissions office. The woman on the line was calm and helpful. She confirmed the attempted withdrawal had been denied because it failed the verification process. "We just wanted to check in case you were unaware," she said. I wasn't unaware. I was just blindsided. I thanked her and hung up, my heart still racing. I didn't need to ask who made that call. It didn't take a genius to figure out what happened. Maybe they thought if college didn't happen, I'd have no choice but to stay. Maybe they didn't want me to go because if I succeeded without them, it would prove what they feared most, that I never needed them to begin with. That night, I didn't rage. I didn't send a long, dramatic text. I simply blocked their numbers. I sent Grandma a quick message explaining everything, and she called within minutes. Her voice was tight with fury, but calm. "We'll handle this," she said. "You focus on your life now." And that's what I did. I settled into dorm life, met my roommate, nice guy, computer science major, talks in memes, and found a rhythm. I got a campus job at the library, started classes, and even joined a student group for first-gen college students. Turns out, a lot of us had similar stories. Different details, same feelings. We found family in each other. 1 week later, a care package arrived with no return address. Inside was a new phone charger, some snacks, and a small note that just said, "Keep shining. We see you." It was Grandma's handwriting. I smiled. For the first time in years, my story didn't feel like something I had to survive. It felt like something I was finally writing for myself. I never did call my parents, never felt the need, and they didn't try again either. Maybe they got the message, or maybe they didn't care enough to chase me. Either way, I was done performing, done waiting, done asking for a version of love that only showed up when eyes were watching. That chapter of my life was closed, not with a bang, but with a soft click. A quiet lock on a door I'd never open again. College didn't feel like a fresh start right away. It felt more like a quiet unlearning, like I was slowly peeling off layers of who I had to be just to survive back home. I spent the first few weeks adjusting to my new routine: early morning classes, library shifts, late night study groups, and learning how to cook without setting off the smoke alarm. There was a freedom in the simplicity of it. No eyes watching, no voices undermining, no invisible scoreboard comparing me to someone else. And yet, despite the peace, I found myself looking over my shoulder every now and then, not out of fear, but habit. Like I was waiting for the past to show up and remind me that I didn't get to leave clean. The past didn't show up in the way I expected. It came as a voicemail on a random Wednesday afternoon. I'd just gotten back from class, threw my bag on the bed, and saw the missed call. It was from my uncle, the one who'd always been quiet at family gatherings but observant. The one who had spoken up that night when Aunt Tasha called out my parents. I hesitated before listening. I didn't know what I'd hear or why he was calling now. The message was short and measured. "Hey Ellis, it's Uncle Jamie. I wanted to talk. There's something I think you should know. Call me when you can." That was it. No guilt trip, no guilt-laced pleasantries, just a calm request. I waited a full day before calling back. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I needed to be in the right headspace to handle whatever it was. When I finally did call, he answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, but there was something behind it, like he'd been carrying a weight for too long and finally decided it wasn't his to hold anymore. We didn't waste time with small talk. "Ellis," he said, "I should have told you this earlier, but I wasn't sure it was my place. Now I think it is." I leaned back on my dorm bed, phone pressed tight to my ear. "Go ahead," I said. He paused. "When you were born, there was a fight. A bad one. Your mom had been so sure she was having a girl. She'd even told people not to bother with gender-neutral gifts. When the nurse announced it's a boy, she went silent. Didn't even hold you for the first few hours. It was your grandmother who stepped in. The room felt still. I could hear every breath I took." Jamie continued. "She tried to come around later, acted normal on the surface, but something in her changed. Your dad was frustrated. They'd had a pact, 2 kids, and done. He wanted to move on, but she kept saying she felt cheated. Said something like, 'We were supposed to have a daughter to balance things.' And from that moment, everything with you became a compromise. They raised you, yes, but they never saw you. Not the way they saw Reed. You were a reminder of what she thought she'd lost." My chest tightened, but I didn't speak. He kept going. "I didn't say anything back then because I thought maybe things would shift with time. But when I saw the way they treated you at that birthday, the way they handed you that Subaru like it was a burden, I realized nothing had changed. I sat with that for a long moment. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt like puzzle pieces were snapping into place one by one. I thanked him, and he apologized not for what happened, but for staying silent. "You deserved better," he said, "and I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for a while, thinking about all the years I spent trying to earn something that never existed. The love I wanted wasn't missing, it was never there to begin with. I wasn't just overlooked, I was resented for not being a fantasy. That kind of truth doesn't shatter you, it clarifies you. It shows you the blueprint behind the silence, the mood swings, the empty birthdays, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. A week later, I got another unexpected message, this time from Reed. We hadn't spoken since our brief call after I moved in. His message just said, "Can we talk?" I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. When we spoke, his voice was cautious, like he didn't want to scare me off. "I came home for the weekend," he said, and yeah, I think I finally see it. "Everything you said, everything Grandma told me, it's true. They're not mad at you, Ellis. They're disappointed you didn't disappear. That line hit harder than I expected. They don't say your name unless they're trying to explain why you're difficult. And when I brought you up at dinner, Mom said, he's too sensitive for this world. Dad just nodded. I didn't know how to respond, so he kept talking. I'm not coming back after graduation, he said. I already started applying for jobs here. I can't live in that house again. I think they wanted me to be the one who stayed close while you vanished, but it's going to be the opposite. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he added, I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I should have said something back then. I don't know if this means anything now, but I want you to know I'm rooting for you. It wasn't some grand movie-style brotherly reconciliation, but it was real, and that was enough. Weeks passed, and I started settling into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. My grades were solid, my friends were becoming like a second family, and for the first time, I was building a life without anyone else's blueprint. Then came fall break. I had planned to stay on campus, but my grandparents insisted I come to their place for a few days. When I arrived, they greeted me with warmth that hadn't faded, not even a little. They cooked my favorite meals, made me feel human again after weeks of microwave dinners and cafeteria food. One evening, as we sat on the porch, my grandma looked over at me and said, Your mom called. Wanted to know if you were coming for Thanksgiving. I froze for a second. What did you say? I asked. I said, it's your choice. But Ellis, don't go if you're only going to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I thought about that line for days. Thanksgiving came and went. I didn't go. I stayed with my grandparents instead. We made a small dinner, played cards, watched old movies, and for once, the holiday didn't feel like a performance. It felt like peace. I didn't hear from my parents again, not that week, not after. Maybe they got the message, or maybe they convinced themselves I was just being dramatic again. Either way, I didn't care. I wasn't angry. I was just done. And being done? That's where the real healing started. By winter break, I had made peace with the silence. My parents hadn't called since the Thanksgiving no-show, and honestly, it felt like a gift. No guilt trips, no emotional traps disguised as concern, no reminders that I was only ever tolerated under their roof. I didn't expect anything from them anymore. And when you stop expecting, you stop being disappointed. Campus had gone quiet. Most students had gone home. I stayed behind a few extra days, finished finals, and helped close up the library for the semester. My plan was simple: head to my grandparents' place for the holidays, unwind, eat real food, and stay as far away from forced smiles and cold dining tables as possible. But the past has a habit of knocking when it thinks you're finally steady. The knock came in the form of a package. It was sitting on my dorm bed when I got back from a final exam. No return address. Just my name, scribbled in my mother's handwriting. I stared at it for a while, debating whether to open it at all. But curiosity is a loud thing. Inside the box was a photo album. Old school. The kind with the sticky pages and faded corners. I flipped it open slowly. Baby photos. Some I'd never seen. Some with me in my crib. Some with Reed holding me, grinning with the pride only a 3-year-old could pull off. Then came the notes. Tucked between pages, scribbled in blue pen, my mom's voice on paper. I skimmed the first one. You were not what we expected, Ellis, but that doesn't mean we didn't love you. We just didn't know how to show it. I blinked slowly, absorbing the weight of those words. It didn't sound like an apology, more like a confession. The next note was worse. There were times we resented how different you were from Reed. You didn't shine the same way. You were quiet. You felt things too deeply. It made us uncomfortable. I sat down, hard. My hands shook a little as I turned to the last page. A photo of me around 12, holding a spelling bee trophy, smiling like I was still trying to earn something I didn't understand yet. Underneath it, the last note. We're sorry for not being the parents you needed. We thought we were doing our best. Maybe we weren't. We hope you're doing okay. That was it. No please come home. No dramatic plea for reconciliation. Just a trail of half-formed regrets left like breadcrumbs in a box. I didn't cry, but I didn't feel warm either. I felt heavy, because that album wasn't a bridge. It was a memory box filled with echoes of everything they could have said when I still lived there, but didn't. And now that I had built something without them, they wanted to drop in a footnote that read, "We tried." But trying late is not the same as showing up early. I closed the box and placed it on my shelf. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it out. I just chose not to carry it with me. That choice felt like something sacred, like walking away without needing the last word. The next day, I packed up and headed to my grandparents' place. The moment I walked through the door, the warmth was real, not performative, not scripted. My room was still there, clean, cozy, my favorite blanket folded on the bed like it never left. Grandma didn't ask about the album. Grandpa didn't mention my parents. They knew. And I loved them more for not trying to make me process pain on their schedule. We decorated the tree that night, ate too much homemade fudge, watched old sitcom reruns, and laughed so hard we cried. And when I looked around that room, I realized something I hadn't been able to articulate until then. I wasn't missing anything. I hadn't lost a family. I'd found mine right here. Later that week, I got a message from Reed again. He was visiting from out of state and wanted to stop by for a few hours. I said yes, not because I owed him anything, but because he had been trying. And trying with honesty, not guilt. When he arrived, it was low-key, no dramatic speeches, just two brothers sitting on the back porch with mugs of cocoa, talking about life like two people finally meeting each other in the middle. He told me he'd seen the same photo album, that our mom had left him a copy too. It felt like she was passing off responsibility, he said, like she wanted me to carry the guilt she refused to hold. I nodded. He wasn't wrong. Then he looked at me and said something that stuck. You know what's crazy? You were always the strong one. They just couldn't see it because your strength didn't look like theirs. That sentence sat with me long after he left. Because it was true. I hadn't rebelled loudly or fought back with fists. I survived with silence, with patience, with resilience built in the quiet. And maybe that kind of strength didn't win trophies or front row seats at family events, but it got me here. And here was starting to feel like freedom. New Year's came fast. My grandparents and I watched the ball drop from the living room, clinking glasses of sparkling cider and exchanging resolutions. Mine was simple. No more explaining. Not to people who only listen to argue. Not to family who only hears what fits their version of events. Not to ghosts of a childhood that never gave me a seat at the table. I wouldn't erase the past, but I wouldn't justify my future through it either. That night, I opened my laptop and typed out a single email to my parents. It wasn't long, just enough. Thank you for the album. I received it. I'm doing well. I hope you are too. I won't be visiting for a while. Please don't contact me unless it's something important. I wish you peace. I hit send, closed my laptop, and never checked for a reply. Some people think forgiveness is a conversation, that it has to be a reunion or a healing circle or a second chance. But sometimes forgiveness is just a boundary, a firm, quiet one that says, I'm not angry anymore, but you don't get to hurt me again. That's where I was. Not bitter. Just done. And in that kind of clarity, I finally felt light. Like the past no longer had its hands around my throat. Like I didn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace over performance. The day before I returned to campus, I walked out to the backyard where Grandma was planting herbs. She handed me a small pot with sprouting lavender. For your dorm, she said. Something to remind you that you always have roots. I smiled. Not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from being seen. Really seen. I didn't say much, just held the pot close and nodded. And in that small gesture, I understood more than any letter or album could ever explain. Family isn't always who shares your blood. Sometimes it's who shares your silence and makes it feel like safety. Returning to campus after winter break didn't feel like coming back to school. It felt like returning to the place where I finally started breathing for real. There was no dramatic shift in the landscape, no sudden burst of clarity the moment I stepped onto the quad again. It was quieter than that, more personal. Like a coat I didn't know I needed was suddenly wrapped around my shoulders. The lavender plant Grandma had given me sat on my desk near the window, soaking up the pale January sun, a reminder that I could grow anywhere now. I wasn't escaping anymore. I was arriving. Classes picked up quickly. The library hours started stacking again. Life resumed its pace, and I melted into it without resistance. My world became study sessions, cheap coffee, unexpected friendships, and late-night walks where I thought more clearly than I ever had in my life. And still, every now and then, I'd glance at the plant and think of that phrase, something to remind you that you always have roots. Not in the way people usually mean it. Not a call to go back. Not an anchor to old pain. But proof that I came from somewhere and chose to keep growing anyway. There's a difference between being tied to something and being supported by it. I was finally learning that. I didn't talk to my parents again. Not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to explain. Their silence remained steady, and I let it stay that way. No news from them meant no more reopened wounds. And honestly, I didn't miss the version of them I'd grown up with. I stopped hoping for a version that had never existed. Instead, I focused on building something new. My grades were the best they'd ever been. I made friends who liked me for who I was, not what I represented. I even got invited to a few small gatherings, nothing wild. Just quiet groups of people who laughed easily and didn't expect me to earn a seat at the table. It felt unfamiliar at first, being accepted without condition, but I didn't push it away. I let it settle into me like warmth after a long storm. One afternoon, I ran into someone from high school. Olivia. We weren't close back then, just classmates who occasionally shared a group project or a knowing glance across the hallway when someone said something dumb. She spotted me near the student union, and we ended up grabbing coffee. The conversation flowed in a way it never did back then. Maybe because we were both different now. Or maybe because, for the first time, I wasn't hiding behind silence or shame. Eventually, the topic drifted to family. She asked gently, not nosy but curious. I gave her the short version, the car. The favoritism, the quiet exit. She didn't gasp or pity me. She just nodded and said, "That sucks, but I'm glad you're out of it. No probing, no performance. Just someone recognizing the weight and not trying to carry it away." It meant more than I expected. Spring rolled in slow and soft. The lavender bloomed a little more. I started journaling late at night, not because I needed to vent, but because I wanted to remember what peace looked like in real time. Some days it was a well-cooked meal I made myself. Some days it was sitting under a tree on campus, listening to music that didn't bring back bad memories. Some days it was just silence without anxiety. I didn't need grand moments anymore. The small ones were enough. They built something more lasting. I started volunteering at the writing center, helping other students shape their essays, organize their thoughts, say what they needed to say. It was funny, in a way, how I used to struggle to find my own voice, and now I was helping other people strengthen theirs. Full circle, almost. One student came in, anxious about an assignment, worried her professor wouldn't understand her tone. I told her, don't soften your truth to make it easier for someone else to read. Say it how it lives in your head. The right people will get it. She blinked, then smiled, and I realized I was saying it to myself too. My grandparents visited once in the spring, just for a weekend. They didn't stay long, didn't hover, just brought some home-cooked meals and checked out my dorm. Grandpa fixed the sticky window that I kept ignoring. Grandma restocked my snack shelf and asked if I needed more socks. We sat outside under the cherry blossoms and talked about nothing important, and it was perfect. They didn't need me to perform or impress. They just liked seeing me in a place that fit. As they left, Grandma hugged me tight and whispered, "You look lighter." And she was right, I was. Not because life was perfect, but because I had stopped dragging the weight of what it never gave me. Finals came and went. I passed every class. God offered a summer internship at a local nonprofit doing writing and digital media work. Nothing glamorous, but solid experience. I accepted it without hesitation. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was just building something honest. The last day of the semester, I walked across campus alone. Not sad, not celebrating, just steady. That's the word I kept coming back to. Steady. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Later that night, I wrote one final journal entry for the semester. I didn't start it with Dear Diary or anything cheesy, just a few lines. They said family is forever, but I've learned it doesn't always mean what you think. Sometimes family is the people who plant roots under you, not the ones who chain you to history. And sometimes healing isn't loud. It's just the quiet choice to move forward. I closed the journal, placed it beside the lavender, and turned off the light. And that was it. No dramatic ending, no revenge plot. Just a kid who grew up invisible and decided to stop explaining his worth to people who didn't want to see it. A kid who found family in the quiet, in the kindness of two grandparents who never gave up, in the friends who met him where he was, in the peace he gave himself when he stopped trying to make the story fit someone else's version. I wasn't the golden child. I wasn't the forgotten one anymore either. I was just Ellis. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Story 2, get out! Get out! Get out! In a fit of rage, Seamus grabbed my collar and attempted to pull me away. Keep your hands off me! I snatched his hand away with such force that he staggered and almost fell. Melanie came forward and gave me a forceful smack across the face without saying anything. Jonathan, you're no longer the lobby manager earning tens of thousands a month. You're a worthless nobody now. Were you really expecting us to tolerate you? Then she yelled down the corridor. Safety! Where is the security? Do you hear this? A squad of security officers hurried over. Melanie yelled at the security officers and gestured toward me. How can you allow anyone to enter here? Hurry up and get this bigger dude out of here. The security chief came up to Melanie and inquired nicely. What's the issue, MAAM? Melanie gestured once again at me. This man is a destitute straggler attempting to get food here. Release him! The security head gave me a chilly look and said, Please go, sir. Although I lived and passed away here, I generally maintained a low profile, seldom disclosing that I was the hotel's owner. Only the senior management understood who I was seeing the head of security try to kick me out so rapidly. Is this how you handle situations? I asked him, glaring at him. Are you unaware of the hotel's rules? We should not judge somebody by their looks or upset any guest. The security chief's eyes flickered with apprehension. He no longer dared to speak as he gave me an uncomfortable look. When Seamus saw this, he grew nervous. Don't be duped by him. Simply put, he is a broke ex-con. Get rid of him. I apologize, sir. We never kick out visitors for no reason. The head of security adamantly declined. This time, Seamus demands. Well, what are you security personnel doing, being intimidated by a couple of his statements? Gavin yelled at the guards, then turned to me again. Don't think you can get out of this by bluffing, Jonathan. The motel manager here is someone I know. You can leave with that when I give you a call. He took out his phone and dialed. This is Gavin, Mr. Feldman. You. I'm occupied. Gavin stood awkwardly holding his phone as the conversation ended suddenly with a frigid response. I smirked and asked calmly, You want to talk to Mr. Feldman? Allow me to assist you. After pulling out my phone, I dialed Mr. Feldman. Private room 777 is here. 3 minutes or less. Have you gone insane, Jonathan? You're an ex-con with no money. Don't act like you're a big deal here. We know exactly what type of person you are. Does this act need to be performed? Gavin gave me a smirk. The other family members gave me a clown-like expression. Their expressions become contemptuous and derisive. Melanie remarked, embarrassed, wiping the perspiration from her brow. This is really embarrassing. How could I have brought up such a son? James appeared frustrated as well. Jonathan, simply go. Give up acting like you're embarrassing your family and yourself. Exactly. Some folks are so impoverished that they've gone insane and started to have illusions. Even Mr. Feldman was beyond Gavin's reach. And you believe you can? It's absurd. Seamus laughed. His voice was full of disdain. He glanced at me as if even recognizing my presence was beneath him. However, a middle-aged woman in a suit came to join us as he was finishing his sentence. I was imprisoned for 2 years after taking the blame for my sister. However, after I left, my sister and brother-in-law joined my parents in attempting to evict me from the house because they were concerned that I might vie for the property. Joanna and Seamus killed someone in an accident 2 years ago while they were driving my car in the wrong way and at high speeds. My folks approached me right away. They said that Joanna had a weak heart and had married at last. In addition to losing her marriage, her life may be in jeopardy if she was sent to prison. They sobbed and pleaded with me to shoulder her responsibility. They assured me that when I left, the entire family would kindly reimburse me. I did it for no compensation. I did it because I genuinely cared for my sister and I loved my parents. I lost my job, sold my vehicle, spent all of my funds, went to jail for her, paid the compensation, and put up with all of the abuse. However, I never imagined that my selfless sacrifice would be greeted with such disdain and hatred. I don't get it. Blood should be thicker than water, right? Why does loyalty to family become so irrelevant when one's own interests are at stake? When Joanna heard what I had to say, her expression darkened with annoyance. I've already thanked you for taking the fall, she shot back. Do you need anything else from me? Seamus and I are expecting a baby in a few months, and I now own this house. The space is insufficient. You must leave. In her opinion, we cannot afford to support a lazy person. A single thank you was worth 2 years in prison for her. I became the unreasonable one by requesting more, Melanie chimed in. Don't you understand, Nino? It is a man's destiny to get married and support his family, not to rely on them. Our goal was to get you married to a decent woman and get some security. Now, though, no one will want you since you are an ex-offender. Letting you stay here is contemplating old time's sake, Seamus went on. Exactly. If we let you stay, you'll be impoverished forever because you've been to prison. You'll drain us dry, he remarked in a ruthless tone. James muttered icily, extinguishing his cigarette. You've grown up, Jonathan. It's time you realized how important it is to support the family rather than cause strife. My heart was pierced by each of their statements like a sharp dagger. My eyes swelled in spite of my utter disappointment. No wonder you never visited me once during my 2 years in prison, I murmured hoarsely as I glanced at them. I assumed you simply didn't have time to see me. However, it appears that you merely regarded me as a source of income. Without hesitation, you booted me out of the house. The time I lost my ability to earn money, I tried not to cry as I tipped my head back. So, you're all determined to kick me out today? I questioned. Seamus said without hesitation, yes. James, Joanna, and Melanie all appeared equally determined. Negotiation was obviously out of the question. Their eyes showed no sign of fondness. I gave a nod, my heart completely broken. All right, as you like. We're over as of today, and I hope you won't regret it. At last, I recognized them for what they truly were. My efforts throughout my 2 years in jail were not worthy of these folks I yearned for. I would now be left without a word about the $100 million I had intended to give them. Without turning around, I left through the door. I heard Seamus yell bitterly behind the door. You think too highly of yourself. Is there anything to regret? Severing connections with a broken ex-offender like you, we would truly regret allowing you and many of us to remain here, getting out of that cruel house. I spend a lot of time wandering the streets by myself until I eventually locate a hotel to stay in. I lay on the bed and gazed at my bank account's 9-figure sum, deep in contemplation. I used to assume I lived in a really happy family. When I encountered challenges at work, my father gave me advice and consoled me calmly. When I worked late, my mother would deliver my favorite food to my office. When it rained, my sister would come get me from work. I felt like the family's beloved young prince. Every time I read about parents favoring females over sons online, I couldn't help but be perplexed. How are these families possible? What parent could not adore their son? However, I now understand that terrible sense of disappointment and powerlessness. I came to see that I had always been a member of this kind of family. Every love I had experienced was contingent on my ability to be of service to them. I resembled an investment more. My money was the reward, and their love was the price. Thus, there had always been a hidden cost associated with the gifts of fate. They grinned at me when I was able to earn money and make sure that everyone had a comfortable life. However, they suddenly viewed me as a valueless ex-convict who was unable to obtain employment. The love they had shared was gone. They had no idea that this former scammer had $100 million in his account. I couldn't help but get a little thrilled, wondering how they would respond to the son they hated the most being at the top of the game. One day, I got to a hotel in the heart of the city the following day. This hotel wasn't your typical one. It was a first-rate, expansive facility that served banquets, corporate events, and even eating and accommodation. It took up a full building and had 8 levels. The location, surroundings, and foot traffic were all excellent. Before I went to prison, I worked as a hotel lobby manager. Naturally, I wanted to return to my old profession, only this time. Not as a manager, but as the owner. I bargained with the hotel's owner for several hours and ultimately acquired the hotel from her. I took over control the very day. From then on, I lived and ate at the motel. seizing every occasion to learn and build new management and operational strategies. Under my direction, the hotel's business grew, becoming so popular that it was practically difficult to acquire a reservation. I soon became a bona fide, affluent man in the city. One evening, 6 months later, while checking the dining department, I overheard Joanna in a separate room. I had to reserve this hotel for my daughter's 1-month celebration because it is so well liked. 2 months in advance simply to obtain a table. I've heard that this restaurant only serves the best. Joanna, you succeeded, bringing us to this opulent location. I stopped in position and realized Joanna had gathered our parents and a bunch of relatives to this private room for her newborn daughter's 1-month celebration. Melanie was busy filming films with her phone to show off. My face emerged in the frame when her camera panned to the door. "What are you doing here, Jonathan?" Melanie scowled at me and put down her phone. Everyone in the room looked at me when they heard this, standing in the entrance. "Are you ashamed, Jonathan? You followed us only to hunt for food even though you knew we were hosting a feast here today." As like I were the disease, Seamus came running up and reprimanded me. "Who said I was here to get food via scrounging? What are you here for if you're not here to scrounge begging?" I calmly answered. "This upscale establishment is only for the rich. Go rummage among the trash outdoors if you're hungry." She looked at me with a look of complete contempt and crossed her arms, saying, "That's where you belong." The other family looked at me with disgusted frowns and glares, as though I were a bothersome insect. Joanna also raised her voice, clearly unhappy. "You mentioned that you wish to break off contact with us, Jonathan. You've stooped to follow us for a free supper, even though I believed you had some backbone. It is very repulsive." Before I could react, James piped in, "Jonathan, I trained you from an early age to be self-reliant and have some backbone. Did you forget? How could you sacrifice yourself for a meal?" I scowled as I glanced at them. "It's only a supper. I don't care about it. Don't you think you're something? Sour grapes. As if, despite your life's labor, you, a destitute ex-con, could ever buy a dinner here." Seamus scoffed. Story 3. Then I got to know Jen. When I moved back in October, I met Jen at a pub, and we clicked right away. We met a couple more times before we really made it official, and she was without a doubt the most attractive and educated lady I had ever encountered. Neither my relationship with my parents nor my relationship with her were clear to me. For the most part, I was prepared to break up communication if necessary, so I didn't want to bring up my family. At my family's supper table, my folks circulated my phone around the table as they demanded to view photos of my girlfriend. When Mark saw it, he lost it and called me a jerk for hanging around with his ex-girlfriend. I denied his demand that I end my relationship with her. Jen acknowledged that they dated and provided me with the specifics of their split when I questioned her about it. He ended their relationship after just 1 month since he was tired of being in a relationship and had no intention of getting married anyhow. This year, I asked Jen to marry me by taking her to a lovely dinner with our family and her closest friends on her birthday. Mark snapped again and blasted out about my proposing to her, which my sisters and I promptly shut down. For the last 2 months, Mark had kept silent about the entire situation. Since I didn't see him very much, I assumed he didn't communicate with me very often, which I didn't mind. Then he invited Jen and me to join my parents and sisters for a family supper at his apartment. We decided to go even though I thought it was strange because my dad and sisters were also going. We moved to the living room to chat after a pleasant, unpretentious supper. After we had been talking normally for about half an hour, Mark got up and announced that he had something important to share. After giving a lengthy speech about how delighted he was to have his family present for his special occasion, he proposed to Jen and took out this inexpensive diamond. Jen felt perplexed and uneasy. She insisted that he put it away and rise up. I ran to my dad before he could grab Mark, and I punched him instead. He claimed to have intended to avenge himself and demonstrate to me that Jen wasn't genuinely interested in me. This is the final straw. A few days later, Jen and I decided to uninvite Mark after returning home. My mom dropped by my house and said she wanted to discuss my wedding. She questioned why I was so insistent that Mark not attend. "I shouldn't be so self-conscious about mine," she remarked. He added that if I weren't going to invite Mark again, she wouldn't be attending either since I'm ostracizing her son, so I shouldn't be so anxious about Mark and Jen's past connection and not inviting him. I shrugged and informed her that I wouldn't ask her to come, so if that's what she wants, she can throw her invitation in the garbage. I informed her it wouldn't be the first time she missed an event due of Mark when she asked whether I would be cool with her not going. She rushed left after accusing me of making an offer and bringing up her prior transgressions. She stated she wanted to talk about everything and clear the air when she came by around 2 weeks after she made the decision not to go to the wedding. She said that she couldn't move on from me and that she didn't invite her due to a simple oversight. She claimed it was a joke when I pointed out that it was an easy error for me to sit less than 3 feet away from my fiancé and propose to him. As things heated up, we started yelling at each other. Jen stood up and made her way to the door. My mother trailed behind her, still yelling at her. By now, while Jen was opening the front door, she was screaming that she was tearing our family apart. Still yelling, my mother grabbed her hair and dragged her to the ground. I pulled her away from her and tossed her outside after she struck her and attempted to scratch her face. She constantly called both of us and pounded on the door for a few minutes while I checked on Jen before she departed. I texted my mom to let her know not to bother reaching out once I was certain Jen was all right. We would never talk to my mom again, so I texted her to tell her not to try contacting me again. It's not up to us to determine if it continues, even though Jen doesn't want to pursue anything. However, they would take our choice into consideration. After that, I was taken aback when my mother yelled at me for attempting to destroy her life and tried to corner me as I was quitting my work. She said that I was a terrible son for attempting to have her jailed over a little indiscretion, and she didn't know what she had done to warrant such a punishment. I advised her that if she didn't want to face legal repercussions, she shouldn't have struck Jen. I refused to comply with her demand that I inform the police to forget the report. I informed her of the officer's statement that I had no control over it. In addition, I informed her that I would never be able to forgive her for the things she did to Jen and to my sisters and me as children. She began to explain that I should move on like my sisters, but I interrupted her and told her that I would never forgive her, so she should accept their forgiveness and move on.